Hey, this is Judd, and this is Reply Show Delta for Daydreaming About Dragons. And I got a nice reply from Alex Schroeder, who has a cool podcast called Halbreds and Helmets. You should check out. I'll put a link to it. And he is replying to the world building inspiration from last episode. And he says, my starting point for world-building inspiration is usually history and Wikipedia. I'll see a little statue of Pazuzu at the Louvre, Freya in a story, add them to my pantheon, read Wikipedia pages, and try to summarize the important aspects in 2 or 3 sentences. Brings pestilence winds, but also protects against child defects, or rides a chariot drawn by cats, and stands for birth and death in the circle of life. Good stuff, sets roots, and grows. Yep, awesome. I like Wikipedia, and as a librarian, let me give you a Wikipedia tip. When you use Wikipedia, my recommendation, I'm just going to go to a Wikipedia entry to make sure I'm walking you through this right. Definitely, I love using Wikipedia, and I would be lying if I told you any different. But check out the references at the bottom. That's kind of where the good stuff is. And it's also a good way to make sure that the facts are decent. I remember way back, I was teaching a bunch of high school kids how to use Wikipedia, and I looked up Joan of Arc, and it turned out that one of the facts about Joan of Arc was taken from a self-published novel about Joan of Arc that clearly wasn't factual. So when you're using Wikipedia, if you want to back up your sources, just check out, look at the references at the bottom, see where this stuff is coming from, check the links. And it's also a good way to find other stuff, right? I mean, I remember the old GURPS books, my favorite part of the GURPS books, and you can tell I was someone should have just told me, oh my God, you're a librarian, was the bibliography in the back. I thought those were so cool. And you could just see how the author got to where they were going. So check out the references at the bottom of Wikipedia, and wherever it is you want to start for world building. Yeah, I mean, that was the whole point of that world building thing was find your apple pie and build out from there. Find that thing that inspires you and gets you to, through doing that labor. Because it is work, but it's fun work. And it kind of never stops because, when you're building a world, everything kind of filters into it. And, yeah, just kind of have to continue being a student and, find that lens that you can look through so that you can be looking for something specific. Thank you very much, Alex, and I'm enjoying your podcast. I'm going to listen to more. I've only listened to 1 episode so far, but thank you very much for the reply, and let's go on to the next one. Hey, and my next one was, so not really a ton of call, the next one, and it's not a tweet or a toot or an email or anything. I actually had lunch with my friend Dev Purkayastha, and he was listening. He mentioned listening to my show, which is very, very, very flattering. When friends listen to my whatever, it's nice, and it's happened before, and I'm always amazed and flattered and surprised. Very, very, very nice. And we had a nice lunch where we talked about stuff related to the show, and mostly the thing I wanted to take away from it is he mentioned ways that he was thinking about framing dungeon crawling, and I'll let him. I'm not going to talk about his ideas because I want him to be able to develop them on his own, and I don't know how much he wants that out in the world. But I'll just talk about in general. I liked the idea of kind of municipal dungeon crawling. And part of our conversation was about how to make that work, and part of it is how to not make it work. And I'll put a link to some blog posts that I wrote about a municipal dungeon crawling game that did not go well. And here was the idea. I was basically taking an old idea for a city called Marsui that I had made up years ago with a friend of mine. And it was for an old Burning Wheel game. And in the game, one of the setting conceits is that there's a new queen, and she has opened up the borders of the city to monsters. So suddenly, vampires, liches, mummies, they can all just come into the city and live as long as they agree to go by the rules. And I set the dungeon crawling game you're all going to wince because it's so obvious this is a terrible metaphor. I set the dungeon crawl game years later. After she had died, that law was rescinded. So all these citizens who had lived there for centuries, many of them undead and immortal, or gods or goddesses or kind of inhuman wizard-like beings, were suddenly non-people, right? So you get these people who had been like contributing and been part of the city's culture for centuries, and suddenly were considered non-people. And this is before our current president. But it was an ugly metaphor then, and it's an ugly metaphor now. So let's talk about that a little bit. Talk about monsters as metaphor. I feel like it's a kind of a hot-button topic. I like my monsters. I like the metaphor to be buried in there under a lot of weird. I feel like the best person at this right now that I can think of is China Mayville. His monsters exist on their own kind of logic. They're not stone cold metaphors for anything, but there's something there going on that's saying something about humanity. But he also enjoys monsters enough where it's just a monster out of love for monsters, right? And because scary mosquito people are cool, it doesn't necessarily have to be saying anything about bloodsuckers or people who are parasitic. So I get it. I get it that sometimes the metaphor, you want to like just move past the metaphor and just have, mosquito people who are just mosquito people. Yep, I got it. But sometimes the metaphor is too on the nose, right? And when you've got a city passing laws that says that some of the people who live there are no longer people, it gets ugly, and it gets ugly super fast. So that was one kind of problem with the municipal dungeon crawling, as I saw it, is that sometimes the metaphors can get a little too tough. One way I've always wanted to do it is have it be where there were these sorcerer kings who lived in the city and mined something, and they've strip mined the city of something. It could be dreams, it could be some kind of unobtainium or something, and they're gone. They've left, but their garbage and detritus and labs and towers and manufactories are still around. So you're going through and you're kind of cleaning them out. And I like that idea. There's kind of I don't know. It reminds me of how there are these towns in Western Massachusetts that GE used to have facilities in, and then GE left and just left the towns devastated. And it reminds me of that, of corporations coming into a town, making it a place, and then leaving for better profit margins elsewhere, and leaving behind a total mess. So are the Sorcerer Kings a corporation? No. Again, I don't want my metaphor to be too on the nose. But when I'm taking inspiration, that's there. And I like when my monsters are standing in for things. Again, I don't want the metaphor to be too good and too solid and too on the nose. But I want something there, some inspiration, some nugget of something real in there that's egging me on. And so Dev and I kind of talked about that, and he told me his ideas, and I asked him, what they were inspired by, and again, I'm always kind of looking for the metaphor, and he kind of was like, not so much. So, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Metaphor and dungeon crawling and not making it too clear. I think you can go a little too far, and it doesn't need to be. Sometimes you can just make something fantastic because it's fantastic. And I'm reminded of, also of how Tolkien didn't like his Lord of the Rings story to be taken as a metaphor for World War II, right? And yeah, I mean, I feel like if you make a good enough fantasy story, it's going to be a metaphor for something. Someone's going to see. Humans find patterns, and we see them everywhere. So if you do it, you're going to see something. But if you make something up, someone's going to see something about the real world in it. But doesn't necessarily have to be true. And while I think you want it to less be a direct metaphor and more be evocative. That's the word. That is the word. Evocative. So, yeah. Less metaphor, more evocation. I don't know. Thinking about monsters, thinking about dungeon crawling. Thank you, Dev, for lunch. Going out to lunch with me on Christmas Eve. I appreciate it. It was nice that you went out with this lonely Jew on Christmas. I appreciate it. And that's it for my replies this week. I'm glad I got anything because it's a holiday week, so it's kind of weird. If any of these shows, any of the Daydreaming About Dragon shows inspire anything in you, any replies, please feel free to send me an email, an MP3. You can reply on the Anchor app, or whatever it is, and I'll put it in a reply show. All right, this was Reply Show Delta. I hope your inspiration goat is braying loudly. Have a great week, folks.